This isn't your typical motorsports podcast. You're listening to Crush This, a monster truck podcast presented by High Octane Coffee and J Concepts. A show where we take you inside the minds of your favorite drivers, past and present, of the monster truck industry. And now, your hosts, Brad Shaw and Dan Chichagash. Buckle in. The show starts now.
Welcome to Crush This, a monster truck podcast. I'm the host, Dan Agosh, with Brad Shaw. Brad Shaw right now is over in Canada doing some editing software and stuff like that. I also want to thank High Octane Coffee, Go Big Then Go Home RC, and also Obsessed Wear. We're getting new decals out for you fans, so it's going to be coming out and pretty good. This is one episode that's pretty cool. It's one of our... you guys are starting to like the guys that have been running in the beginning in the monster truck world. This gentleman that I have met him at the Hall of Fame, and he also came and visited me at Fort Myers, Florida, when I was driving the ride truck still am for the Raminator monster truck team. The cool story background, he'll explain to himself and everything like that. But the cool story is this: he was a very popular driver in a monster truck in the late 80s and until the 90s. He still ran a lot too, so he'll tell you your story. This is Gary Schram, the driver, owner of the Nebraska Big Red. How you doing there, bud?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
Pretty good on this fine Wednesday. I was about to say Tuesday. So the fans, let them know about how you got started and how it came about to become, the popular Nebraska Big Red monster truck.
Well, back in the days, like everybody else, us old-timers, we watched Bigfoot. We saw Bigfoot at a show somewhere, and we thought, man, that's cool. I can do that. And we all had trucks jacked up, and big tires back then were 35-inch monster motors, and Gateway Gumbo Monster Motor came out with a 44 back in the 80s, and I ordered a set of those, and I think there were only 3 other sets in the state of Nebraska at that time, and one of them was Wheeler, ended up with the Pterodactyl monster truck, and Dave Wyzork out in Grand Island with the Nightlife monster truck. So we all kind of had the same silly ideas back then, so the people would tell us. But it was just a big truck that just kept getting bigger and bigger, and once we saw Bigfoot do what he did in that big stadium crush, we all said, hey, we can do that. And that was the beginning.
So how did you come up with the name of the Nebraska Big Red? Even though you're from Nebraska, and I think, isn't the Big Red a nickname for the University of Nebraska? I don't know if I'm correct.
It is. It's the football team. Yep. No, it's the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and it's Go Big Red. So even back in the day when I had 44s on my truck and neon sign in the tailgate and gull-wing doors and tilt hood and all that stuff, I was doing a bunch of car shows. I was in the ISCA car show circuit, and way back then on the back of the truck, since it was on 44s, when you pulled up behind it, all you could see was the rear axle because, the trucks back then were, that was unique to be that tall. And across the back axle, way back in those days with the 44s, I put on the back axle, "This is Big Red Country." So it had the history of the Big Red kind of way back, before it ever became the monster truck. So in homage to the Cornhuskers and Nebraska and my roots and everything, I just went with Nebraska's Big Red.
So this is
proud of the state I come from.
This is a curious question. So, I mean, obviously you're a Cornhusker fan. Did you ever go to the football games and tailgate and people caught the eye of the truck and be like, that's freaking cool, and took pictures and stuff like that? Or did anything like that?
Ironically, when Monster Truck started back then, I had approached the university. I had worked there for a while back in my cooking days. And my father was an insurance agent in Lincoln, and that's where I grew up. And he had season tickets his whole life, and we were always tailgating and going to all the games. And I had approached the university, but at that point, monster trucks were really unknown. And every time I brought up the idea of a big truck with 66s that would get all this attention, I kind of got laughed at. You didn't have any real pictures to show anybody, and it was something that was unfathomable at the time, and basically I just got laughed out. Nobody, you had nothing to show them, nothing to prove to them. You had no track record or anything like that. So same thing with sponsors. I had approached all the sponsors and all the people that I dealt with for years, like the oil people and the sponsors for the car places and stuff like that. But the Midwest is so sprint car oriented that they wouldn't even give me a quart of oil because I couldn't prove to them that I could bring customers in or anything like that. But boy, did that change.
So further down along, want to know, how did you get yourself into the United States Hot Rod? You were basically on most of the television programs back in the late 80s and early 90s with the United States Hot Rod. How did you get yourself into that cookie jar?
Well, basically at that time there were trucks starting to pop up, and today the sport today has evolved so much, and obviously for a little history lesson for some of the younger ones listening to this and watching some of these shows, back in my day there was no Google, there was no internet. You couldn't get on the internet and go to a website, order a brake kit for 2.5-ton axle. Everything that we did and we needed and we built, we made ourselves out of scratch. You got a piece of plate steel, a piece of pipe, and got a piece of cardboard, and you made your pattern and you cut it out and you ground it down, and that's how things started. These days, even for some, now it's incredible that I could just get online and order everything I need and have it all here in a week. It's just it's crazy. But back then, without having that ability to do that, some guys would everybody was kind of the half-assing it and not and a lot of trial and error. So the guys like me, basically, I was told by some of the people at the U.S. Hot Rod Association that planetaries, you probably weren't going to get a job because the biggest thing they wanted was a truck that would last all weekend long. So a 5-ton truck would make maybe and bust a knuckle, and it would delay the show. And you got to remember too, back in the day, the monster trucks weren't the primary. It was a tractor pull, and after the tractor pull, the monster trucks came out and did a little thing afterwards. So if you had one die, they ruined the show or broke down. So it came down to planetaries. The Hot Rod Association was looking for planetary trucks, and I splurged. I went to Salt Lake City and hooked up with Mark Boyce at Boyce Military and Equipment out there. And Mark was one of the pioneers in building planetary axles back then. And Mark and I have spent a few times on the golf course and hooked up a good friendship, and he hooked me up. He let me come out to Salt Lake in Ogden, Utah, where they're at, and he let me come to the shop and build my own planetaries in his shop. So that's how I got into the Hot Rod Association. Basically, I had a truck that was reliable. I didn't have a big-ass blower motor back in the day when I started. I had a small block with a supercharger, but my truck would run every time over the cars. It would start, it would go, it performed, and it never broke down. So I think that was one of the key things that kept me busy with them, because I was a very truck, and that was very important back in the day.
And also, I think this is a cool story that you told me when we were in Fort Myers. You were one of the unique trucks outside of Bigfoot and maybe Excalibur. Your suspension system on your Big Red / later down the line, we'll talk about Psycho, but the suspension system that you had your truck, a lot of people were surprised about it. I was one of them too, because I was always curious on how some shows you did your thing, but other shows when you gun it, that truck soared to the point of how far USA 1 or Bigfoot or Excalibur, even Gravedigger and them would go through. You were doing that with that truck until all the way through, even being a really strong competitive truck with the trucks going 4-link. Talk about, if you want to, talk about the suspension on that Big Red, because I think a lot of people would be rather surprised about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, a lot of us guys aren't looking to blow our own horn, but we all had our idiosyncrasies and our little things that we did that were unique. And my truck, for one, was a show truck that I turned into the monster truck. So, I had gull wing doors that opened like a Lamborghini. Then I had a neon sign in the tailgate, flush mounted, and tilt bed and a tilt hood, like some of the other cool trucks back in the day. And I had seen Samson with a big tilt hood and Excalibur and all those trucks, the old square body Chevys, and that's what I wanted to look like. And I wanted my truck to perform like Excalibur, like Mike Nichols. His truck was so badass. He would nail it all the time, and that truck would go. And I kind of saw his truck the one time and noticed that he was running a longer travel spring. And the thing with the springs back in the day was the leaf spring packs my very first truck had 18 springs in the front pack. And that was great for suspension and progressive suspension because that's what was available at the days. But I was looking for something that was adjustable. And being in Nebraska, one of my dad's, being in the insurance business, one of his customers that he insured was a Crete Carrier. We've all seen the CCC Crete Carrier trucks on the road. And the guy out there was, I was looking at some of the trucks and the suspensions on the semi-trucks, and I noticed the airbags, and I thought, you know what, that's all adjustable. They can dump the air, they can put the air in, make it stiffer, make it less. So I went to my semi-truck place and did a lot of research on the airbags. And again, no computer, no Google, you can't ask Siri. You got to go out and ask the old man that's out there all greasy and covered in transmission fluid and gear lube, and the guy that you don't want to take to dinner because he smells so bad, but you can sit him down for 15 minutes and learn more than you could in a stack of books. That guy had done everything and knew everything. So I went out there, and it's amazing what a 6-pack of beer and a pizza will get you for information back in the day.
Right.
So I went with the airbags. The airbags were adjustable. I went to a long travel spring. Most of the springs were 48, 50 some inches. I went to a 70-inch spring, real long travel, which also worked as my top link for my suspension. So it basically was a 4-link without a crossbar. And because the leaf springs being a complete spring kept the axle located, but they were only working as the locator and actually as a sway bar because the airbag was in there taking the shot. And then that made it adjustable. So if I was doing a wheelie contest, I'd pump the airbags up to 110, 120 pounds, and I could hit those cars, and the airbags would still absorb it when I came down, but they would absorb it, and I wouldn't have that big rebound and look like a basketball like all the trucks would do. Then if I was going to do a race and hit a ramp, I could air those bags down to 60, 70 pounds, and when I hit the ramp, it would absorb the shock and not throw me straight up in the air. It would let me go ahead. So if I was doing a race for competitive pay, I would air the bags down so I didn't go flying through the air, so I went forward. And then if I was doing something like the long jump at the Jamboree, which I ended Bigfoot at, they gave us a 100-foot run, and Kramer got first place, and I only lost to him by about 5 feet. And because my airbag's way up, so when I hit that ramp, it sailed. I still feel that landing to this day. Missed all the cars.
So yeah, I mean the air that you got in that truck, like for mention about Tampa in '89, that I think that was one of the shows that you're in, one of the Tampa shows that you cleared most of the cars there, and then further along the line, you transitioned from the Big Red to the Psycho truck, which I'm assuming you wanted to throw a different scene for the truck, but there's really a big story behind the Psycho truck, because outside of the air that you got, you were also known as a wheelie guy, and you had most of the time some of the most violent backup get-ups, like Galloway already said, reverse wheelies than any other truck. I thought that was pretty cool, but you want to talk a story about the idea of the Psycho identity for your truck?
Yeah, nobody back in the day was doing backwards wheelies. I saw Alan Tura with Goliath do a backwards wheelie one time, and he did it because he had that back engine in there. But all the trucks back in the day were a front engine, so if you went backwards, that weight would get away from you, and you would tend to be easier to flip over backwards. But back in the day, being young and dumb, And you know what? I was trying to climb the ladder and do crazy things. So I was always amazed me how some of these guys, I don't know, I just had the knack for the backing up. I could back that truck up and didn't have to take a back and forth at the ramp and at the line. I mean, if you can't pull in the stall, it still amazes me that these people pull in the parking stall and have to go back and forth 5 times to get it straight. If you can't get your car in the parking spot in one shot, you shouldn't be in it. And the same thing goes for the monster truck. These guys lining. Back in the day, that was one of the things that irritated me. These guys going out, pull up to the cars, back up, pull up to the cars, back up, pull up to the cars. How many times do you need to get lined up? I would drive out and just hit the cars. Hence, on my T-shirts, I had the Just Do It. Back in the day when I went to Psycho, I had Just Do It on my T-shirt until Nike, who had just got that phrase and got a trademark on it. I got a cease and desist letter from them saying I couldn't use that anymore. But I would do these backwards wheelies, and quite a few times I landed on my front end. And I watch these guys walk it now on the front ends and stuff, and that's amazing. I probably could have done that back in the day if the engine would have stayed running, but the engines back then wouldn't stay running because we didn't have the equipment that we have available these days. Your motor probably run upside down for quite a while anymore these days. But I would do backwards wheelies, and everybody, I was Big Red for how many years, started calling me. They said, "Man, you're crazy, you're psycho," and it just stuck. Every promoter said, "Man, you're psycho when you do that crap." And so after a couple years of Big Red and Hot Rod Association saying same thing as some of the small reporters, it's like I did real good with Beckley and doing Motorsports of America promotions and doing all the winter tours, but I would win either me or Jerry Richmond, and most of the time, and they didn't want to run the same name truck back to the same venues another year, like 3 years in a row. And so Hot Rod Association said the same thing and said, would you mind, would you consider painting your truck? We still like the truck. Could you just either, change it a little bit or change the name or the color or something? So I said, sure. I always liked that blue, and everybody called me Psycho, so that's where that came from. And so basically the Psycho was the same truck, a little updated on the suspension, bodywork, and sponsorship from Lund with all the fairings and the racerback spoilers and the wide sides. It was a real pretty truck. And, going back to these, we were starting to get into all these weird colors and the neons and all that. So I went with the Bahama Blue Metallic, and that everybody calls it Pepto-Bismol Pink, but it was actually I can't even remember now. It was some kind of special, pink it was. But I as much as these guys teased me about that pink, I sold a crap load of shirts with it.
Yeah, speaking of which, T-shirts was always a big deal, and that was one thing I always noticed back in the day was T-shirt sales, and you had to have the truck to perform, and it seemed like you had the equation down on what to do, and you ran that thing for a long time. Then later on down the line, let's say do the timeline, you got yourself with the Miller truck deal, and how did that all? I think you did tell me the story about that at Fort Myers, but I think it's a very interesting story how you got yourself a deal with the Miller General and Draft and the Miller Company.
Yeah, I was running Psycho for a while, and then I was hanging out down here in Florida because I was starting to get spoiled. I built a really nice motorhome chassis. Back in the day, there were none of the diesel pushers and semi-trucks available and stuff, and definitely no RVs that had a motor enough to pull any kind of camper or anything. So I had built an international semi-truck and built my own camper, and ended up, since I had a nice home on wheels now, I kind of thought I was going to winter. And so I hooked up with Kevin Dabney and ended up in Tampa and got they needed a truck to do for a local distributor. And they said that they would paint it and they would do all the work and letter it and all that stuff. And so we signed a tentative contract, and I Pico truck, black with the Miller, and was doing some displays with it, and then went and did some shows with it. And at the time, NASCAR number 2 Miller Genuine Draft was winning everything. Rusty was on top of the world in NASCAR back then, and so it was brand, and I was going around to bars and dealerships and distributorships for Miller around the country, and proved to them that it was a very, very good promotion tool. I did a spot in California in Napa where they did the NASCAR race, and they had Rusty's car at one end of the grocery store, and they had my monster truck at the other end of the grocery store, and I had 20 people for every one of that car because they'd never seen a big truck like that. So once I proved to them that it was a very, very lucrative deal for them, they ended up coming up with the money for a poster and a new truck, and so I proceeded to build the new chassis, body, and everything. And then at the last minute, I took a week off and switched the axles and the motor over to it. And then that was the very first nitrogen suspension I started with back then. The second Miller truck that I built, the Crusher, had nitrogen shocks and stuff that Kevin was pioneering. He was ahead of his time with building cool, neat stuff. Didn't always survive too many runs, but he was the one that up with a lot of these ideas that are being mass produced today. People thought he was crazy, and I happened to be around him enough that I picked up on all stuff and helped him design some of the first suspensions and the nitrogen shocks and the accumulators, and it worked. So my last Miller truck had 20 suspension travel, and it didn't even bounce. I could clear 6 cars, and it would never rebound. So pretty impressive stuff, but like I said, we had a lot of trial and error, a lot of time in the shop, a lot of broken stuff, but the Miller truck worked out real well. I ran shocks and those struts for quite a while and never had a problem with them.
So, yeah, I say so. So you ran that truck for a good while, and when did you technically stop doing monster truck racing?
Well, I did my back for time. I landed and finally went to the doctor and herniated another disc and pushed a disc out into my sciatic nerve, and the doctor looked at me and says, if you land one more time like that again, you may end up paralyzed. So that was a eye-opening experience. Being the fact that I had just had a 2-year-old, my firstborn was 2 years old, I looked at him and said, you know what, I want to see him grow up, and I don't want to be in a wheelchair the rest of my life. So I said, you know what, it's time. So I took the out of the truck and we put a stock engine in it. I did rides for quite a while. Caught a lot of crap about that. Being one of the first ride trucks, I called the school bus so many times I almost painted the truck yellow.
That's pretty cool. And now you're in the good old state of Florida, which is pretty cool. And the cool thing is some of the guys that you ran with in the past come and hang out with you, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. I think I'm going to have to put another mailbox down by my mailbox because of Terminator and Lethal Weapon fame is a winter resident down here. As a matter of fact, a couple weeks ago, he just came and got his fifth wheel out of my yard and took it back home for the summer. So him and his beautiful wife Amy come down every couple weeks, and we go ride Harleys and hang out and have a good old time. That's what us retired old farts do. But yeah, when you got property in Florida and got room to park as many semis as you want, everybody knows where you live.
That's pretty cool. So since now, what have you been doing? I know you're a very favorite hobby. It definitely is the Harley Davidson that you have, and motorcycles.
Yeah. Do a lot of riding. Yep.
Do you still
do a lot of riding?
I hear you.
Still do. What?
I hear you. Yeah.
We still go fishing. Do a lot of fishing down here. I moved down here because I can be offshore in 30 minutes, and I can be in the swamps in 30 minutes. So not doing too much swamp more these days because of those big giant snakes that are out there that could swallow me because I don't run that fast anymore. But still like to go out and do the fishing, and I got horses now, and I ride my horse, and you know, and I have a welding business. I do welding and fabrication. I do a lot of work on boats, and plenty of boats down here all year round, just like the Harleys, and it keeps me busy. Definitely keeps me busy.
And it's also pretty cool seeing you at the Hall of Fame and everything like that. How do you like the Hall of Fame? And if anyone's listening and ever wants to go see it, what they should expect?
It's amazing. I'm with Jeff and the guys up there have done an amazing job with Marty and Mikey Vaughters and all those guys that are involved in that. It's phenomenal. A lot of the kids, I don't see it as much anymore, but I hear it from some of these, you know, the grandkids of friends that I have that growing up that have just seen a Monster Jam show and don't even know where Monster Truck started or came from, and you know, and with the technology we have now, you can see what happened at the Monster Jam show 2 minutes after it happened from 5 different angles on YouTube. Back in my day, the show that I did in Tampa in January didn't hit the TV until March. I would be on TV on a Saturday night, and Sunday morning somebody would see me in the grocery store and go, "I saw you ran last night, blah blah blah. How'd you get here so quick? You flew a fly home or what?" I go, "No, that was like in January 3 months ago." It takes that long to put a production together, and these days it's instant. So it's amazing for those guys to try to preserve the history of where all this started and where it all came from. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a little kid, and if it comes up in conversation, some parent or something will say, "Oh, he used to race monster trucks." And I go, "Oh yeah, I used to run over the cars," and they look at me like I was silly. "Why would you run over cars?" I go, "Well, that's how it started." And then you got to have a 30-minute conversation of explaining the history of monster trucks to these young people, and it's kind of like, you know, NASCAR had a start, and drag racing had a start, and there's all these museums and stuff for all that, and everybody knows about it. You know, almost every diehard NASCAR fan knows that they started from bootleg running moonshine on the beaches and stuff like that, and if we didn't preserve that history, then, you know, it would be lost forever. So and being that a lot of the videotapes back in the day were very few and far between. I mean, if you had a video camera back then, it was the size of a briefcase, and you were rich because they were really expensive. So one person would have a tape, and they'd end up spending all night in the motel making 6 or 7 copies for all of us. So it's just it's amazing that they put that together. And, you know, I've been there a couple of years in a row now, and I saw my good buddy Gary Bauer get inducted last year, and he's one of the ones that was paramount in getting me started in this. He and Brett Engelman with Ice Monster fame came to my hometown and did a show, and I had seen Bigfoot, and Gary was nice enough to be one of the guys to actually talk to me, and same thing with Brett Engelman, and they had some broken parts and needed some things fixed, and so I invited them to my house, and they came and spent the night, and we had a good time and a good talk, and Gary had me come out to Ohio and helped me set me up with my very first parts and things like that, and you know, these guys, you know, that started and been around forever. I mean, if it wasn't for the Hall of Fame, nobody would know about this stuff. So, you know, and it's such an event for the fans, a monster truck fan, and you want to meet some of these guys, you can go there and hobnob and get all their autographs and listen to the question and answer and history. And you know, other than a Monster Jam show, there's no other place where you can go and see that many of us older guys in one place if you want to do. But definitely it's important to me because I'd like to preserve the history of it, because there's a lot of things that we did and pioneered and stuff nobody knows about, or guys like you doing these wonderful podcasts and stuff like that, nobody would know about it. It would just be lost forever. I had a box of two big 5-gallon totes of VHS tapes that I recently had converted to DVD because they would just sit in my closet away. And I'm pretty sure that there's other guys, older guys like me, that have the same thing. So, this is a challenge to some of them if they're listening to dig those in, call some people and get them digitized so that they don't get lost forever.
Yeah, I noticed that it's starting to get really popular because Jeff Dane just did that. He just came up with his DVD with all the footage of his trucks, and it seems like he already pushed almost 1,000 copies, probably more right now by the time this podcast airs to the public. So that's pretty freaking cool for that. What year was your Nebraska Big Red truck?
Big Red, I think I started in 1985, and because in 1980 I bought my first semi truck, and I think so it was about 85, 86 that I finished it.
Okay, and what was the body? What year was the body of the truck?
It was the very first truck was a 1976 square body Chevy, and then when I went to Psycho, I updated 80, 82 or 83 with the single headlights, not the double headlights.
Oh, okay.
Just because I thought that. Yeah.
That's just, if anyone wants to know, go ahead and Google that. The truck is pretty cool, and if you YouTube it, you'll probably see a lot of the ESPN United States Hot Rod Monster Truck Challenge stuff, which was pretty cool to see and stuff like that.
And then there's a little, if you put in Nebraska's Big Red with Back Channel Productions, you'll end up with a little video of a lot of stuff I did that Nick Davis put together with Back Channel Productions of all the DVDs that I gave him. So, there's a lot of stuff out there. I was going to pick Dane's CD, but I'm pretty sure the couple times that I beat him in those shows aren't going to be on that tape. So.
Speaking about one of the footage, Nick did release the Jacksonville show. That was the one where
right.
You had that really violent rollover with that truck. Now, please explain.
Yep.
The reason why I'm going to this is I think a lot of fans don't understand that back then isn't like what it is today. You can't have, like, for instance, back last year, Mark had a rollover with Raminator in Bloomsburg. We had we had the truck ready to go with a new body within within a week's time. With the situation that happened with you, just explain to people about the difference. How long did it actually take? Do you actually get a decent new body for the truck, or had to find something to replace it, or you had to run it just like it is to make it to the next show?
Well, that was a nightmare because that was my first major rollover. What happened is a simple bolt broke and ladder bar dropped down, and when the ladder bar dropped down and I landed, the wheel rolled up underneath the cab and it just stopped turning. So it just kind of like kicking the leg out, eat the dog, and it just kind of tripoded and went right over. And it looked pretty violent, but it was pretty slow motion. And what was amazing, at the time I was racing old Big Jerry with Weapon One, and the first one to get to me to pull me out of the truck was Jerry himself. So it was devastating to the truck because at the time that was still the truck that I had driven on the street. So it had a complete interior, a complete radio. It still had velour captain's chairs in it for the seats. No racing seats yet. We weren't into that yet. And I had a sunroof actually in that truck, and at the time the hood still had a tilt hood. So when that thing went over, it was devastating. It wasn't a chassis. It had a roll cage inside and a roll bar in the back, but which protected me just fine. But the rest of the truck got destroyed. The hood, the bedside, destroyed. And I worked on that thing for a week because the very next weekend was Tampa Stadium Camel Series, and I run for SRO Pace at Tampa Series at the Super Bowl of Motorsports. That's on YouTube now too. And that where I ran against No Problem, and then ran Bigfoot and lost by just a teeny tiny squeaker bit. And that I spent a week, a little town in northern Florida, beating that thing to death and trying to find a cab, and I ended up putting a whole new cab on it and all front end and no windshield, no grill. That's why I didn't have one at Tampa Stadium, because I just got to Tampa Stadium and the paint was still wet on the truck. And it was ironic too, because the transfer case had exploded when the drive shaft went up into it, and I had welded it all back together, all the pieces I got back together, and I welded it all together, and I wasn't sure it was going to last. So when we did the qualifying in the afternoon, I just drove around the cars, and because I figured if the transfer case is going to explode, it's going to do it on my first run, and I'm just going to stuff it to the floor and go. So hence my very first run was against no problem Moore, and John Moore, ironically, the weekend before had rolled over where he was in Tennessee or something.
In Tallahassee.
And he had rolled over. Yeah. Yeah. And so he was in Tallahassee, right. And so I had rolled over in Jacksonville, and he had rolled in Tallahassee. So we were going to find out who was a little gun shy, and I think I won that one because I pretty much mopped up no problem. Like what's his name said on the ESPN, he said it was no problem for Big Red. So, but the transfer case actually held together, and then of course with the luck of my whole career, I always end up against Bigfoot right off the bat, and I would just at that time in my career still running the blown small block. I just couldn't keep up, and but I gave him a run. He beat me by 800ths of a second, but again it was all or nothing. So I put it to the floor, and I don't think either one of us touched the cars. But you know, it was
so like you said,
it was different back then.
I mean, I was just saying you got lucky to find that bed tab and stuff like that. It would take longer than that if you were looking for a new body truck, correct?
Right. Because actually at the time there was so much old trucks and old stuff sitting around too. Because I thought, you know, it was the '90s, so you're looking for a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old body, and so I got a cab and doors and a front clip. That was all I needed, and then the rest I kind of pieced together. And then after Tampa, I spent some time, and that's when I went to Kevin's place there and rebuilt it and started putting it back together, and was going to change it to Psycho. That's when we were coming up at the end of the year. So, yeah, these days with the full cages and the full chassis and tube chassis and stuff, those things can roll over a couple times and barely get any damage. But you know, my rollover that first time was the, you know, that was pretty heartbreaking, because that was the truck that I drove on the street, that I had built since high school, that, you know, had the stereo and the neon sign and all the stuff in it. And that's what was so personal about it, because, you know, all our trucks were individual trucks and not special built for, you know, monster trucking or racing. They were all street truck guys, and our guys that had grown up with these things and built them, spent years building these things, and then decided to make monster trucks into them. Unlike, you know, these days where it's a special purpose built monster truck, and basically it's a giant dune buggy now with a fiberglass body that's designed to fly off the first big hit it takes. You know,
I always enjoy when people say, "Oh, the truck's not real," and I'm always telling them, "You ever seen a NASCAR Monster Energy Cup car today? Are you telling me that car is still stock? That car is not even stock." You know, or a funny car.
And that's the same thing, because yeah, the NASCARs, the funny cars, even the dragsters, they're all so totally different because of technology now that they, you know, that's just the way they've evolved. But, you know, we were a bunch of old guys that, you know, had our, like I said, the truck I drove to high school and stuff that I, you know, slowly grew and slowly grew and slowly grew. And, you know, it's like breaking up with your first girlfriend that you think you're in love with when you crash that first truck.
Yeah, I bet you on that. And another curious form I wanted to know, if you remember the maintenance of your truck. I know when we're done with the show, we have a whole list of stuff to nut and bolt, tying up, stuff like that. And even if the truck did all right, we still have to do a maintenance plan on it. When you did a show with your truck beforehand, did you do a full-fledged nut and bolt, or did you go after items that you know for a fact would get loose, or you need to stay on top of it so you won't have any issues in the next show?
Yeah, we pretty much there was a lot of things that were an issue, and you just checked up on them. The biggest thing in the trucks back then was, the ability to squeeze the horsepower out of them, and then you were building a stock engine into this big horsepower thing with all this compression, and the biggest problem back in the day was keeping a starter in these things and keeping a lot of these guys, when they started cranking these blower motors around, you couldn't put an alternator on it because you kept throwing an alternator belt. So everybody always had a dead battery, and they would eat starters because the big blower motor with all that compression, once it gets hot to start and stop it all the time, it wouldn't start. So that was I would keep 3 or 4 starters, and that was back in the days before the high torque starters and the gel batteries and all this fancy stuff. I went to semi-truck batteries, some big group, I forgot what they were, but they were out of a semi-truck, and I had 2 of those in the back. And those the problem with those after I strapped them in, and everybody goes, oh, that's too heavy, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? It doesn't matter. My truck starts every time I turn the key. So
I was also curious on
down the road then for.
Oh, sorry about that. I was must be a little bit of a
lag. No, how what? Yeah.
I was also curious.
Gotcha.
Did anyone ever tried marine batteries, like boat batteries? I heard those have a different type of thing than the regular standard automobile battery. I always thought that was always curious.
Yeah, they do, but back then the boat battery, there wasn't a whole lot of difference in them. They were just a deep cycle battery, and not as big a difference as today. That's why I went to a big tractor battery, big semi truck battery, because it would last for a long time. And then what I did, came out with this teeny tiny 1,000-watt generator back in the day, and I would I mounted that inside in the frame of the back of, and that thing was a little 2-cycle. You mixed up the oil and you couldn't hear it, and I would start that thing up and it put out 10 amps of charge. So if I was time the truck was sitting, I'd just go back there and I had it welded and clamped into the frame, and I would just go back there and I'd pull the cord and I'd let that thing, and it would keep my battery charged all the time. So it worked out pretty slick. I had a lot of cute little things that I kind of pioneered and that made the truck reliable as it was.
And it seemed like that was the platform that you really did with that truck, is to be reliable. Having 4 or 5 starters, have a mini 2-cycle generator to keep your battery charged, your truck being a planetary truck. I'm assuming you also went through your suspension, for example. Did you ever try to test the waters on the angles of drive shafts? Because it seemed like that's another issue back then, was a lot of trucks had too violent of that drive shaft angle, and they always snapped.
Well, I eliminated that because when I built the last truck with the newer 90s body, the genuine draft crusher, that sat so tall. The reason it sat so tall is because it had 20 inches of suspension travel, but sponsorship from Lund, who made all the fiberglass products, the visors and the spoilers and the racerbacks and everything, I didn't want to cut out the fenders because I liked the looks of the truck. So if you're not cutting the fenders out to make room for the big tires, you just got to jack the truck up. So that's why that truck, it looks so tall, and I actually liked it. I thought it was a cool, really, really tall, cool-looking truck. And but in order, when I built that truck, I was looking at all these transfer case options, and Profab had just started. Profab had been around for a while in the tractor pullers and multiple engine configurations and stuff, making gearboxes. But some of the guys had just started using them for the monster trucks, and even back then they were thousands of dollars. So. And I go back to Nebraska, and I go out to my local machine shop, and I'm talking to the guy about maybe gears and what it's going to take to build. I need a transfer to drop down, 20-some inches to eliminate these driveline angles. So this old guy out there tells me, he says, why don't you use a chain? I'm like he was crazy. And he looked like me, like I was some stupid kid, which at the time I was, 20-some years old. And he says, you. And I go, well, enlighten me. So he tells me, he says, how much horsepower has that truck got? I said, 1,000 horsepower, with my chest all. And he goes, He goes, how much do you think the combine has on the front of that combine head? I said, I don't know. He said, probably 30,000 pounds. I go, okay. And he says, what do you think runs that? I go, I got no clue. He goes, a chain. I go, really? He goes, yeah, there's a 60 chain on there. And he says, for brakes. So he says, if it can handle 30-some thousand pounds of torque, he says, I don't think your puny little whatever you got in your pickup truck, your big stupid pickup truck, is going to break. So my machine shop guy built me a couple shafts, and I ordered some gears, and hence I designed and built one of the very first transfer cases. I built it in the beginning thinking that it was going to stretch, it was going to break, and blah, blah, blah. But that chain in the half ran it with the big alcohol motor from BDS Blower Drive Service in California. That chain never stretched an inch, not even a half an inch. I never adjusted it. It never gave me problems. It never made any noise. And the biggest thing to this day, and this is a little secret I'm letting out there, is chain does not transmit vibration, unlike the gears in a profab box. And I know they cut these gears a little different now, and they've guided them down and stuff. But back in the old days, you could hear a profab or a box coming because of the screaming and growling of the gears. And my chain transfer case took all the vibration out of the drive lines and did not transmit it to my engine. And it was smooth and it was quiet, and I could run the drop as far. And if I needed to change the ratio, all I had to do was open up the set screws and pull the bolts and change the one gear to the other gear and reverse them, and I could overdrive it instead of underdrive it, which I never had to do because I had enough motor. And but it worked out really good. It turned out to be about a third of the cost of a chain or of a profab, and it lasted forever. Now the first couple times I ran it, I was afraid to give it any gas because I was waiting for this thing to go flying out of there, because back in the day, I thought I had a big bad motor. And after about 6 months, I was pulling wheelies off the line with it, and never looked back from there. So now there's a couple of guys. There's actually one in northern Florida that's building transfer cases, chain transfer cases, and he's doing really well on them and selling them. Unfortunately, I had to school him about a year ago about being the first transfer case in a monster truck, and I had to send him a picture on Facebook of my transfer case in 1993 in my monster truck while he was still sitting in diapers in front of his TV eating his Cheerios. So, a lot of these guys these days thinking that they made something or designed something cool or the first or one of need to do a little history and a little research, because some of us have done some of that stuff a long time ago.
Yeah, I hear you on that. It's pretty cool. Some people forget, like you said, and sometimes you just gotta give them a reality check. And I have a few questions for you. It's gonna be off the norm. So, what is your favorite pie?
Gotcha. Apple.
Nice. Three-peat. The last three guests that I had pick apple. Also, what else do you do as a hobby? I'm assuming riding a motorcycle a lot, fishing. Anything else that you do that's pretty in Florida, especially the 365-day year of sun? or your occasional
right. I ride my horse, and I ride the horse, and I shoot my guns, and I got a gun range right here on my property, and I ride my horses on my property, and fly my radio control airplane still, and I'm working on my helicopter pilot's license still.
Oh, cool!
So
cool deal.
When I moved down here to Florida, I flew ultralights. I've got a flight instructor rating for airplanes, and I have an air park right behind me where I live, and so I have planes flying in and out here all the time, and I have some gentlemen over there that I do work for, and I don't get as much time in the air anymore as I'd like to, but it may change because my youngest has just graduated high school, so now Dad is going to have a little more time on his hands, and might be able to start doing some of the things that I want to do now. So she'll be off to college, and I'll have a little extra time.
Were you always interested in the World War IIs or the classic airplanes also, or was there a vintage aircraft that you would love to fly or have one to own?
Not really. I kind of there's a gentleman, an old doctor behind me in the air park that has an old decathlon. It's but it's the fancy version, and he goes up occasionally and does some stunts and flies over the house and stuff. And he I would love to have that. But more so, I really would like to have a helicopter. I'm working on my helicopter rating, and I have plenty of room here at my house to land it. I've landed one, and I would really like to have my helicopter. But that might not ever happen. But we still got to have our dreams.
Also, I mean, I'm just curious because my dad's in the aviation too, and he just sold his Cessna 152. But he's planning on this year or planning on going to Oshkosh for I think it's the EAA group big. It's not air show. It's like their version of SEMA. Have you ever been there, and would you ever like to go to that?
Yeah, actually, Oshkosh is a big show up north, but there's another one down here in Lakeland, Florida, south of Orlando, that's called Sun and Fun. And years ago, a couple of my buddies in the flying, when I had my ultralight, my sport pilots, I had two planes back in the 2000s before Hurricane Charlie that came through here in 2003, wiped all my airplanes. But back then, I used to go and do Sun and Fun every year. So for 7 years, I went up there for the 2 weeks that it happens, just the same. Gosh. And so I would go do Sun and Fun, and I would work the runway with a couple of my buddies, and we would launch the aircraft, and one was the air boss, and we were the crew and stuff. So yeah, I used to be very involved in that, and now it's since I've lost my planes, I went and it seemed to, back in the day, the insurance money for the airplane, it seemed to be safer. My mother at the time, who has since passed, she thought it'd be safer if I didn't fly since my kids were born, and so, but she was all right with the Z06 that I got, that I was driving up and down the highway at 100 some miles an hour. So so I haven't been flying in a while.
Well, this is pretty much a pretty cool topic, and I'm very into aviation, and this podcast is more than just monster trucks. Lately, I've been looking and finding out that the FAA has been looking a lot for air traffic controllers, a lot more aviation pilots. With you being an avid pilot in the aviation, how excited is it for you to find that this form of transportation, hobby, business, work is starting to rise?
It's good. It's good. The thing that scares me is the drones and all that, because it's putting a lot of the helicopter guys slowing their business down, and it's also getting pretty dangerous because some of these people don't understand the ramifications of the ability of some of them to take down a helicopter or a plane. And unfortunately, I coming, it's going to happen. There's been so many close calls right now. It's just going to be somebody's going to be like everything. Somebody's going to have to die before they really take it seriously. But aviation's really going to come up. There's all these giant manned quads, and drone-like electric vehicles that these guys are running, and I've seen these hover bikes that are that you sit on top of and ride, and I think it's just a matter of time before they can get some few more safety mechanisms in these things and make them possible. I would love nothing more than to go out in my shop and hop on a little motorcycle like hover bike and go to feed my horses. That would be kind of cool. Of course, the horses would probably scatter and I'd never find them, but it would be fun for me.
Yeah, that's pretty cool to see you see the future and stuff like that, And I think it's also, helicopters is a really, really quick form of transportation if you want to go to one area to the other compared to a plane. If you're going to Jacksonville to Tampa, you'd rather take a helicopter than a plane, right? Or, Daytona to Orlando or something like that.
The helicopter that I fly down here is a Hiller. It's almost like a Bell 47, like the MASH series and stuff. It's a bubble helicopter, not a jet turbine. It's a regular engine, and it's more for down here. I could fly my house, and I could fly out to the private islands out here, and I could land and fish. There's plenty of places where I could go land on a sandbar and fish where somebody can't, unless they have a kayak or a canoe or something like that. So it would give me the ability to get into some spots that I couldn't normally get to. Plus, I could fly out to the glades and do stuff like that. So it would give me the ability around here to do things like that. The helicopter I fly, I definitely don't think I would want to fly to Orlando or Jacksonville because it only goes about 70 knots, so it's not really fast. And but it would be great around here for just sneaking around, flying out to the island to eat or go to dinner and stuff like that. So it's more of a novelty, fun thing than it is practical.
Probably your helicopter would be good also to go after some razorbacks too, I bet you.
Oh, definitely. They do that in Texas. So they don't do it down here, but they do it in Texas, and that's one of the things I would love to do. I got a couple buddies down here that one of these days they're all going to save up enough money, and we're all going to go out to Texas and take those helicopter hunts, but the only thing I got a problem with is they're doing them all out of these R-44 Robinsons, and that's about the most popular helicopter right now because it seems that it's the Ford Focus of helicopters. They seem to be crashing out of the skies like crazy, and it's always the pilot error, almost always, and because they're underpowered and these people are flying them they're trying to take the Ford Focus and drive it like a Corvette, and you just can't do it. So I'm not so sure I want to hop in one of those things with some guy to go out there and drive it like a Corvette so I can shoot hogs.
Especially when the hogs...
I would be more scared about...
Yeah, I hear you.
Right, and I'd be more scared about the pilot flying correctly. I'd pay more attention to if he was flying correctly, since I fly helicopters, than whether or not I could concentrate on shooting. So
it seems like you have better luck just flying a Cobra, using a 30 cal that's on the Cobra, and just start flying around and start shooting. You'd be good enough with the bends and turns that the helicopter could do with the Cobra, then you can, take care of your hogs.
Yeah, that would be fun. That or an A-10. An A-10 would make a couple good strafing runs because you can fly that slow enough, and an A-10 would be fabulous. That'd be like one of my favorite airplanes.
Man, if you're flying an A-10 Warhog and you try to shoot a hog, might as well be popping pimples off your skin, because when you shoot one of those things, they'd be incinerated.
Yeah, oh yeah, nothing to eat, but...
Especially that cannon, that freaking Gatling gun. I love that. How whoever created that aircraft said, I'm going to build this aircraft around this freaking Gatling gun. And that's it. That's the whole premise of this aircraft.
Yep. And it's going to be built like a tank that flies, and that's what it is. Those things can take so many rounds, it's unimaginable that some of those planes at what they've taken and still flown back. So
someone once told me the A-10, if God had a hand, the A-10 Warhog would be its middle finger. One guy,
exactly.
Some guy, a retired military pilot, when I was talking to him, he said that's pretty much it. That there was the fingers, they would say the thumb would be the C5, the pointer finger would be the B-52, the middle would be the A-10, the index would be the F-14, and the pinky would be the F-117. He said that in God's hands, the middle finger would definitely be the A-10 Warhog. And I was like, I laughed.
Definitely a Warthog, yep.
I laughed a good minute about that.
Yep. If I could have anything, I'd like to have a little a Loach, a little 500D. The little helicopters, those things, the little gunships were pretty cool back before the Cobras and stuff. But those things were really maneuverable and really small. And those guys back in the day, the Loach pilots in Vietnam, they had like a 10% chance of coming back. That's what they always had. So those guys that survived that and stuff are really amazing pilots.
Did you ever wanted to have like a Huey or fly one of those? I know those are very
yeah, definitely.
popular.
Oh yeah, I got Huey fly over all the time here. The mosquito control flies Hueys, and they fly over the house all the time. And to this day, I can be in the shop working on something or doing whatever, and I hear that Huey off in the distance. Whatever I'm doing, I stop and I just go stand out, walk out of my shop into the yard, and I watch the Huey fly over, and I just go, there's my dream job. There's whatever I could do just to be in that thing right now. Yeah, that's the thing. But yeah, to hear them fly over all the time is kind of cool.
I mean, it is pretty cool because they have that unique sound compared to any other helicopter that the Huey has, which, there's always popular being the workhorse of what it is.
Yep, those things were the equivalent to like a 1-ton pickup truck. That's what they were. You could put anything in them and load them down. You could beat the living crap out of them, and they would still fly, and they were reliable as could be. And to this day, there's so many of them flying. It's amazing. So
the last question I would like people want to know is, whatever happened to your big red truck and your Miller truck?
Well, every truck evolved into the next truck. So pieces and parts. The wrecked cab to the first big red ended up in. I carried it around for me. I had a hard time letting go of it, but I carried it around with me for a while. And my grandparents back in the day lived in southern Mississippi, and I think I dropped it off at my grandparents, and then eventually a couple years later, Grandpa gave it to the scrapping guy, and so I think it went to a scrapyard in Mississippi. And then the next trucks just kept evolving. Then every time you'd crash a truck, you just threw the skins away. So the original frame of the original Big Red, Kevin, we had it, and we put it back together as just a stock truck and sold it to some place in Alabama that was a body shop. And so with a stock engine in my original frame and a shell on it with 5 tons, we took it to Alabama, and don't know what happened to it after that. And then the last Miller truck, like I said, I turned it into a ride truck and did rides with it, and then it ended up selling it, and it went to Aruba, and it became the Coastal Crusher. And then from there, it apparently the best that Nick Davis has tracked down, and Mark Werner, a couple of the guys that are really good at this kind of stuff, have tracked it down. The last I know, it is rotting away somewhere in Brazil at a nightclub.
Wow.
So
it's crazy. About everything.
Yeah. Yep.
So is there
yeah. It's interesting.
Is there any type of social media that anyone can follow you or see, or maybe want to add you to see anything from your past days in the Big Red or what you're doing today with helicopters and aviation?
I'm on, like everybody, all us old guys, I'm on Facebook, and that's about all I can handle doing. I don't Twitter or any of the other Snapchat stuff or nothing like that because my kids haven't spent enough time teaching me how to do it. But I'm on Facebook, and some of the videos and things, like I said, to YouTube. So there's plenty of those on YouTube. And a lot of the stuff we had from back in the days, just like I said, there was very few people filming, and when they did, a lot of my stuff, like one popped up the other day on Monster Trucks Then and Now, and they got me just barely going over the cars because back in the day, like I said, all these guys would come out and they would make a whole to-do about driving up to the cars and then backing up and then driving forward and lining up and then backing up, and I would come idling out and I would come idling out and I would just drive right up to the cars and the throttle and launch it. And these people with the cameras and stuff weren't ready because they figured I was going to just go out and go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So I really kind of felt back then not knowing, because every video of all these trucks, when I would have to go out first, nobody ever gets my first, which were the killer ones because it was fresh cars. So everybody, and then the same thing with the backwards wheelies. Everybody, I would come off the cars, tape quits, and then I would do this backwards wheelie and they wouldn't get it. So it was kind of funny. It was kind of funny. A lot of the stuff I did didn't end up on the tapes just because everybody, drove over the cars back then. The people filming never expected me to do what I did. But there's still some out there.
So fans, if you want to catch them on Facebook. Well, thank you, Gary. Thank you very much for the history of what you have done, and also the tech of what your truck was like in the heyday, and when I say heyday, I mean when monster truck racing was in its prime. You were in the deep end of it, especially with the truck that you had. I want to say
back when monster trucks were monster trucks. That's
right. Yeah, exactly. Want to say thank you, and thank you for spending time in this interview, and hopefully you fans got to learn about the Nebraska Big Red and Gary Schram. So once again, I want to thank High Octane Coffee, Go Big Then Go Home RC, also Obsessed Wear, and I just want to let you guys know that this is Dan Cheech Agosh and Brad Shaw. Keep the rubber side down and the shiny side up. Later, guys. All right, thank you so much for everything that you have done, man. That was cool. Good interview.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
All right, man.
Any time. Like I said, a lot of this stuff, I just don't want it to get lost. I got so many things that I've done. He's, working on his book, and it's almost ready. I could write a book too, but then I'd have to be dodging all these guys, because if I told, their wives and them would be chasing me around the country trying to kick the crap out of me.
Well, that's why you got a helicopter.
Right. That's why I need to get a helicopter so they can't find me. But I'm thinking as soon as I decide to retire and get a motorhome and start cruising around the country and disappearing, then I might sit down and actually write and tell some of the stories that I could tell in a book. But hopefully some of those guys might either be gone or not be too old to catch me anymore.
I hear you on that.
Yeah.
All right, Gary, I'm going to let you go here, and I'm going to see you at the Hall of Fame. I'm going to definitely be there, and if I'm around Florida, I know I'll get a hold of you.
Anytime, man. You're welcome here anytime.
All right, thank you, man. Have a good one.
All right, see ya.
All right, see ya.